So hello, my name is Philip Murphy, and I'm the chairman and founder of New Start New Jersey, which is a new policy and advocacy organization focused on New Jersey's middle class with a bias toward job creation and strengthening the middle class economy. I am very thrilled and honored today to be joined by Dann, who's the managing director of Maryland Venture Fund. In that position, he directs investments through the state's Invest Maryland program. And this is a very exciting program, which we think may have some applicability for New Jersey, which we want to talk about. Tom's career has been focused over the years on private equity, venture investing, public and private initiatives to foster entrepreneurship and job creation. He has a bachelor's degree from Stanford and a JD from American University Law School. Tom, it's great to have you with us today.
It's terrific. I'm happy to be able to talk with you guys today.
You were great to do it. So just as a background point, before we turn to ask you a few questions, Tom, just sort of setting the stage, New Jersey, the way I think about it, New Jersey was sort of the Silicon Valley before Silicon Valley was the Silicon Valley. We had the Bell Labs, we had all the Edison infrastructure, we had the Sarnoff Labs. And the reality is obviously a big life science industry, and we still have a fair amount of that, but it isn't what it used to be. So the question is, what are some smart things we could do to try to claw some of that back? Just in terms of statistics, New Jersey ranks, I think, 13th in the nation in terms of venture capital investments, but the decline since, say, 2008 to last year was over 50%, which is to the lowest amount we've had in almost 20 years. It's so if it's 13th in venture capital investments measured by dollars, it's 17th in terms of number of deals executed, with, again, a big drop-off between 2008 up until last year. So we ought to be asking ourselves, listen, we've got the infrastructure, we've got the heritage, we've got a highly educated, among the most highly educated workforces in the world. What can be done to sort of kickstart this and get it going in the right direction? And one of the things we do at New Start New Jersey is we look around the nation and we try to figure out, okay, who's doing something really interesting out there that we could learn from and maybe apply in some form or format to New Jersey. And Invest Maryland is one of those prime examples. Tom, would you mind giving us a quick minute or two tutorial on Invest Maryland, what inspired its birth, and how's it going so far? Great to have you.
Sure. Yeah. I think if you go back to the experience that Maryland was having, let's call it really, back into the late 90s and up till to now, it probably mirrored in a lot of ways what New Jersey experienced. I mean, in the venture sector, we all had the rug pulled out from under us back in 2000 and then again in 2008. And, there had just been a plummeting in the amount of venture invested. And, one of the things that back in 2008, everyone could say were bad, but that at some point the economy was going to improve, and you want to be able to try to accelerate your own state's economy into that larger improving economic cycle situation. And so from a timing standpoint, I think it was a great time for Maryland to look at trying to do something really new and innovative because the motivation was at its peak in that kind of 2009, 2010 period where this idea really first started taking shape. But there was some expectation that the amount of time that it actually takes to get a program like this enacted and to execute on it, that we would be into a kind of beneficial economic cycle by then, that we would be able to kind of use that additional state resource to help kind of fuel an acceleration of the economy. And it's really worked out that way. The Invest Maryland program was enacted in 2011, which basically the structure of it is that the state agreed to auction $100 million of insurance premium tax credits, which is basically, it's like sales tax that insurance companies have to pay on every policy they write within the state.
Right.
And so they authorized the sale of those $100 million in tax credits in an auction to try to optimize the dollars that were realized out of that. There was an online auction that was conducted in the first half of 2012 that yielded about $84 million. So it actually exceeded expectations by, I think, the minimum was we had to get at least $70 million out of it in order to do it, and right. it exceeded that by some margin.
Good for you.
Yeah, and I think we were benefited somewhat by what was the low and is still historically low cost of money at the time. I mean, obviously, insurance companies are actuarials, and they can calculate down to the penny exactly how much, what their savings would be at the time value of that money. And so we were benefited by low cost of money and the discount rate that was applied. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is that it yielded $84 million that was to be paid in by the insurance companies in 3 equal installments in 2012, 2013, and 2014. The insurance tax credits, the premium tax credits, could only be used beginning in 2014. So there was some effort to sort of back-end load the revenue cost of the tax credits, but front-end load, getting the money in so that we could put it to work in the economy. So we're now at a point where all the money's been paid in. They're starting to utilize the tax credits, and that utilization is spread out over the next 5 years.
Over the next 5, beginning in 14 or
beginning in 14. So okay. it's 20% utilization a year, and so the hope is that that portion of the Invest Maryland program where we've invested in venture funds and the proceeds of those investments actually go back into the Treasury to offset the revenue loss, right. Is that there will be a kind of a rough matching of the inflows and outflows of cash over that 5-year period, so that the hope is that the program will ultimately be cash flow neutral to the Treasury.
Tom, one of the criticisms you may know in New Jersey is that we're constantly trying to fill up our shortcomings today with revenue sources from tomorrow. And one of the pieces of this plan that was so attractive, I kiddingly say, listen, our task as a state is to fix tomorrow today, to reverse that. One of the, as I understand it, you've got essentially a program where the capital is returned over time 100%, and the objective is that 80% of the profit would flow to the state. Have I got the math right there?
Yeah. So the better way to think of it's the when any investor invests in a typical venture fund, it's the investors first get a return of capital, and then they get 80% of the profits. So that's the totality of what will flow back to Maryland as distributions are made by those venture funds. So, I mean, to tell you the truth, though, the hope is that the return from these venture funds is going to actually exceed the $100 million of lost revenue.
Terrific.
So
Terrific.
Now, and in the meantime, there's the whole direct investment piece of this. So the way the allocation of this $84 million was handled with Invest Maryland is 2/3 of it went to investments in venture funds that would commit to investing that amount of money in companies based in Maryland. And then 1/3 of it went to direct investment, most of which the venture fund got. So we have been direct investing that money in companies, and the proceeds of those investments will actually flow back into an evergreen fund that we will be able to reinvest over time. So that money stays at work and continues to kind of get compounded job growth over the years.
And Tom, either in the venture funds that you selected to give money to or in your direct investments, have you consciously targeted certain sectors of the economy?
Well, I don't think there was a conscious targeting with regard to the selection of the venture funds that we invested in, but there was, I think, an awareness that there was a sector that was underrepresented among those venture funds, and that is the life sciences sector.
Right.
I mean, that is an area where it's a tough area to be investing in. There are not that many early-stage life science investors, and we didn't have that many that applied for the Invest Maryland money or that kind of made the cut on performance basis.
Yep.
So, we would like to see more of those. But otherwise, from a sector standpoint, I mean, we basically invested in, VCs that are investing in technology companies.
Right. Has the
but let me answer the second part of your question,
please.
though, and that is in terms of the direct investment piece. Is that sector focused? And our mandate at the Maryland Venture Fund is sector non-specific. I mean, we invest across the state's entire economy based on sort of what bubbles up. Mm-hmm. But, the reality is that there are certain sectors that happen to be stronger in the state. We've made several cyber security investments. We've made some medical device investments. There's a lot of stuff coming up in that sector. Mm-hmm. Ed tech, we've made several of those. And otherwise, we've been basically investing in your typical thing that you would see a venture fund invest in, like enterprise software deals or e-commerce companies.
Got it. Another question. You're very patient to answer all these questions, Tom, but we're fascinated by what you're doing. To what extent have institutions of higher education been in the mix with you as either you scope this out or alternatively as sort of locus points where you're seeing some of the investment opportunities?
Well, there are a couple of different ways to answer that question. I think you have to put the Invest Maryland program in the context of sort of the larger set of programs that the state is investing in that help fuel tech transfer and venture. Mm-hmm. And so there's a whole program under the Technology Development Corporation, TEDCO. Yep. That is more investing in tech transfer coming right out of universities and like really, really early stage. I mean, they do grants, they do conditional loans, so they're earlier stage than we invest in. We do overlap some with TEDCO on some of the later stage stuff that they do, or companies that grow to the point where they're ready for a later stage investment. And we certainly spend a fair amount of time at the universities just, meeting companies there just to see sort of what's coming down the path. Mm-hmm. But we're really part of a larger tech transfer effort, most of which, TEDCO is kind of more working at the coalface right on that. Yeah. There's a whole nother piece of something that we're managing here at the Venture Fund, which is the Innovation Fund Initiative, mm-hmm. or Innovation Initiative Fund, which is actually just recently enacted, where for the next 5 years, $8 million a year is going into a fund that will be used to fund matching endowments at the university, technical kind of faculty chair type stuff. That, the hope there, that it's predicated on the idea of a really vibrant kind of ecosystem is based on, a knowledge economy is based on having the brain power there, right? And so I think that the objective is to be able to attract and retain kind of star faculty at these universities, but with a decided sort of entrepreneurial sort of tilt to it. So part of the selection process relates to the faculty members' involvement in entrepreneurial activities.
I love all of the above. There's a sense here that there's untapped potential. You referred to it as the coalface, which is a great way to put it. An untapped potential in the marriage between venture investment and the institutions of higher education here. That that if we could fill that gap in a little bit more proactively, a little bit more intelligently, we've got big upside, and that all of the above you've just mentioned would go a long way here. I'd love to ask you to go back to when this idea was first born, if I may, Tom. What was there opposition to this? Was there a partisan opposition? Was there opposition from any corner, any quarter that said, "Hey, fellas, this isn't constructed right, or this is not likely to succeed," or any of the above?
Yeah, well, let me first qualify my answer by saying that I was actually not here at that time, but I've had a lot of discussions around it because I took over the Maryland Venture Fund in the beginning of the 2013 fiscal year, so that would have been like July 1, 2012. They had just completed the auction, and so I took over the whole kind of push of getting the money committed and allocated out to the venture funds. So I was not involved directly in the legislative stuff, but
right.
I certainly have had a lot of discussions around it. I think the opposition, came from several different directions. Some of it is there has been, and I think this is true, not just in Maryland but everywhere, a certain skepticism about whether a state government has the competence and capacity to be making decisions about where to invest in early stage companies.
Yep.
And to some extent, there's plenty of examples where you could probably show why, they kind of went in as dumb money and it just got incinerated and nothing ever came of it. The Maryland Venture Fund has been in operation since 1996. We actually have pretty good return metrics on the fund, and we've had some just huge wins over time.
Good for you.
So,
there's nothing
part of why.
Nothing like the facts to push back on some of these myths, right?
Yeah, but you do get down to the kind of the granularity of it, like what is your team now? Okay, and
right.
So what had happened during the 5 years preceding Invest Maryland was that the venture fund had in many ways kind of flatlined. The big wins that we'd had where money poured back into the venture fund tended to get sucked out by the legislature, reallocated to other programs.
Right.
And so the venture fund for that period of time was really just kind of, living off, you kind of eat what you kill kind of thing, with just whatever exits they could get on the remaining portfolio was the only thing that they were able to invest. And so the team had been significantly downsized. And so I was really brought in to, in effect, kind of staff up a whole venture fund team. And
great.
And so, in that sense, there was a recognition that if we were going to be getting into this business, back into this business in a really serious way with Invest Maryland, we actually needed to get a professional team in to do it.
Yep.
So I came out of the private venture industry and recruited others that did
at that point.
And so we've got a pretty solid team here.
How big's the team?
There are 5 of us.
Good for you.
Yeah, and which is, by the way, like not enough to do all the things that we're asked to do.
I can imagine.
By a long shot, yeah.
I would have guessed at least double digits. So you're doing a lot with that. With
you
team.
can only hope.
Yeah.
But the idea of it was to bring in create a professionalized process for getting these investments done. And the other piece of it was that we took the fund investment part of Invest Maryland and really integrated it with our direct investment program.
Right.
So, we call the venture funds that we've invested in our keiretsu of VCs, where we have, we're very highly engaged with all of these funds. We have co-invested with almost all of them already.
Right.
We are showing them deals. They're showing us deals. We're evaluating stuff together. So we're kind of bringing in a lot more resources than just us.
Right.
The other thing that I found surprising was surprisingly absent from the debate around Invest Maryland, but that I think is like a major driver. And we started keeping stats on this on our own, even though we're not required to by the legislature or anything. And that is that the nature of venture investing is that when a venture fund makes an investment, like a Series A investment, they almost never do it alone. They bring in their syndicate of investors. So if I have a venture fund where I've invested $1 million in that venture fund, and they've committed to investing $1 million in a company in Maryland, when they invest that $1 million, they're going to bring in all of their syndicate partners who are going to invest multiples of that.
Yep.
So when you start thinking about the leverage of like public dollars and how many private dollars are leveraged by the public dollars, it gets to be a pretty big number of what you've leveraged. I mean, at this point, the venture funds that we've invested in have invested about $20 million in the state. That's since Invest Maryland started.
That is terrific.
But they've brought in these syndicate investments $74 million. So you're talking about almost a 4-to-1 leverage ratio of just the venture investments. So the direct investments, we're seeing on the same kind of thing. It's actually the ratio is probably because we're investing a little lower, and so we end up it has a multiplier effect as you do later rounds. It's probably closer to 9-to-1 for us,
right, on
the direct investment side. So, that's a pretty big impact when you think of all the private dollars that you're bringing to bear. And when people were first thinking about Invest Maryland, they're saying, well, how much of an impact can $84 million have in a state where there's $600 million a year get invested? It can be a pretty big impact when you see that kind of multiplier.
When you leverage it. That's a very fair point. That this sort of a program, this sort of money attracts a much broader indirect pool of money.
That's right.
You mentioned that the skepticism maybe was around, are you guys the best? Is this the best lead investor? You've proven that you are. I also think in New Jersey we've not only got that sort of anti-government skepticism about is this the line of business you ought to be in, but also my point I made a few minutes ago that there's a fear as though this is one-way money. In other words, you're going to subsidize something and never get it back. And one of the great beauties of your program is it's not one-way money.
Well, I can tell you, they brought me in with a real private sector ethos. I mean, I am running our venture fund like it's a private venture fund. And I say to, companies that come in who think, well, you're the state, you're going to cut me a break, and, it's not going to be as much market terms as I would get from a regular VC. And my response to that is, we're really fundamentally different than a normal VC in that we're an evergreen fund, so we're much more patient money.
Yep.
But at the same time, I want their same return, because if I get a 5X off of my investment in you, then I can go invest in 5 companies.
Absolutely.
And that's where we start to get that magnified impact over time, where our fund becomes self-sustaining. We don't have to go back to the legislature to get more appropriations, and that over time it gets to be have a bigger and bigger impact on the state's economy.
Before we wrap, a couple of quick buzzer round questions. We noticed that Pennsylvania has embarked on a similar notion. Did they compare notes with you and try?
Oh yeah. One of my colleagues, Frank Dixon, actually worked directly with them on helping them with their program.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like what's the best form of flattery?
Imitation being the best form of flattery.
Imitation being the best form of flattery. Let me ask you one more sort of big one before we break. Any lessons learned if New Jersey were to go down this path? Any suggestions you'd have for us in terms of how you might design this differently, how you might think about it, structure it differently, et cetera?
There are probably 2 things. One is a problem, and both of these there are a bunch of issues that came up that we solved with a technical amendments bill that we passed soon after I came.
Right.
But there are, in terms of different structure for the program, one thing that I would do differently is most of the pools of money that we invest out of in the Maryland Venture Fund, the standard is that it has to be a Maryland company, or they have to have their principal place of business in Maryland, or they have to commit to moving to Maryland. Okay, which makes it a great recruitment tool, but it also, from my standpoint, it expands my catchment area for early stage companies I can be looking at, right? And in early stage venture, companies typically, there's a lot of virtual companies around there that, only when they get funded do they start hiring employees and sinking roots. And so they've got shallow roots, and it's easy to get a company to move across the river. into Maryland. So the Invest Maryland money has a different criteria, and that is that when our first dollar goes in, they have to already be a Maryland company.
Got it.
So that means the company has to move before you invest. And I just feel like that's not really in the state's interest to do that. So we need to have more flexibility, and also the venture funds that we invest in need to have more flexibility, because I've had situations where they were willing to move a company here that was already in their portfolio if they could count their follow-on investment in that company as part of their commitment. And the answer was no, and they didn't move them. Well, that's the state's loss, right?
Absolutely.
So that's one thing I would do differently. The other thing is an issue that it's an arcane thing that relates to our state law, where we cannot enter into indemnification agreements unless it's for some certain, and there's an appropriation already in place for the amount of that indemnification obligation. Every venture fund you invest in has this thing called a clawback provision,
sure,
where it allows a clawback of distributions in the event that the liabilities of the venture fund exceed their assets. And it's core to the general partners wanting to feel like their indemnification by the fund is rock solid. So for the unfortunate thing for Maryland is that, okay, you may have some certain in terms of the amount distributed to us, but there's no appropriation because that money goes back into the general fund.
Got it.
So we're going to be looking at different ways to potentially solve that problem. This may just be something unique to Maryland. I don't know. But
it's a good question. I'm not smart enough to know if New Jersey has the same issue, and that's something we can look into. But that's a very good heads up, because the clawback feature is going to be, that's just a norm in the venture industry.
Yeah. The other thing that emerged as a result of our investing in venture funds was a lot more scrutiny around the question of if you invest in a private offering, you have to be an accredited investor. If it's going to be an unregistered security, the typical Reg D offering.
Right.
And the state had been investing for 15, 20 years, basically saying we are not an accredited investor because the definition under the SEC regs does not include state agencies as one of the enumerated entities.
Right.
But that there's this long line of no action letters with other states indicating that we would be deemed to be the equivalent of a 501c3. And everyone's lawyers for years and years were accepting this. When we got into investing in funds where there's a lot more at stake and that question being answered the right way, I went back to the SEC to get our own no action letter just to make sure we were free and clear on this. And they basically said, we're not even considering no action letters in this area right now. And suddenly, and by the way, you can't rely on any of those other state no action letters.
Wow.
Suddenly, we were in a position of having to say naked, we are just not an accredited investor in the story.
Yeah.
And the problem is that you invest in a venture fund, and if you're not an accredited investor, then some other investor later on, if they decided not to honor their capital costs, they could just say, well, Maryland wasn't an accredited investor when we invested.
Is that where it stands at the moment, or have you been able to solve it?
No, we fixed it really fast.
Good.
What we did was we moved our whole investing function out into an external set of LLCs that all qualified as accredited investors.
Great. Very smart.
That was something that was unanticipated, that we did some fancy footwork and solved it pretty fast.
Good heads up.
So those are three. And there's one last thing before we get off that I want to talk about jobs.
Please.
The extent to which this is viewed as a jobs program or not. So the reality of venture investing is that relative to other kinds of economic development programs, we got Amazon to come in and put in a distribution center like 1,500 jobs. Mm-hmm. Venture investing does not create that kind of volume of jobs.
Yep.
We might invest in a company which could grow, and maybe become 50 employees before they get bought. But it's a jobs. I sort of say it in the sense that because we're evergreen,
yep,
it's a compounding of those jobs, and over time it gets to be a big number. But But there's an important difference, though, about the kinds of jobs that are created by venture investing. Because unlike the Amazon distribution center, where you're paying a lot of people minimum wage, those people don't have a lot of disposable income. I mean, they spend on housing and food and you get past the necessities, there's just not a lot that they're pumping into the economy. You take a high-tech worker who's getting paid, I think for us, the average salary paid to a company that we invest in is $87,000.
Huh.
And if you create 100 jobs at that salary level, you're creating a multiplier effect in the economy because of all that disposable income that gets spent into the economy, creates another 60 jobs.
Yep, that's
so
huge.
For every 100 jobs we create, there's another 60, and that's it's like a quality over quantity, and it's one of those things that's like an important message to get through to legislators that you're creating quality jobs here, not just growing the number of jobs, because otherwise you'll never look that successful as a jobs program.
It's a very fair point. By the way, New Jersey needs all of the above. It needs jobs of all kinds, but we
all do. We all do. But the question is, what's the problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah, absolutely.
The problem we're trying to solve is creating more high-value jobs.
And it creates it is a meaningful element as we look at your model to creating a 21st century ecosystem from which lots of things flourish. Jobs of all shapes and sizes, and that's part of the reason why we love what you're doing. Tom, we're gonna wrap it up, and just to say to you, keep up the great work. Tom Dann, Managing Director of the Maryland Venture Fund, who oversees the state's Invest Maryland program, one of the great models out there. I'll tell you, I just would take my hat off at many levels in terms of a lot of different programs Maryland pursues, and this is one of them. Keep up the great work. Great to speak with you, and I hope we can meet live soon.
Okay, thank you. It has been a real pleasure.
Take care, Tom. Be well.
Okay, bye-bye.